Imagine. A monkey turns an entire city upside down for 6 whole months, raiding homes, stealing food, terrifying people. But when he's finally caught, what happens next unfolds in a way no one could have predicted. In the bustling city of Bombay, India, life hummed along as usual. The streets teemed with people weaving through the chaos of honking rickshaws, vibrant markets, and towering buildings. The air was thick with the smells of street food, spicy chaat, sizzling kebabs, and sweet jalebis frying in vats of oil. Vendors shouted over one another, their voices blending into a constant hum, while children darted through the crowds, chasing each other with laughter. But high above this lively chaos, unnoticed by most, a small, stealthy shadow moved silently through the skyline, leaping from rooftop to rooftop with uncanny grace. This was no ordinary monkey. This was the city's most infamous criminal, a creature whose reputation had grown larger than life. For the past 6 months, his name, or rather the tales of his antics, had been on everyone's lips. He raided homes with the boldness of a seasoned thief, slipping through open windows or scampering down chimneys. He snatched food from kitchens, ripe bananas, fresh chapatis, even jars of pickled mangoes weren't safe from his grasp. In one particularly brazen spree, he'd shredded pillows in a whirlwind of chaos, leaving a trail of feathers and bewildered residents in his wake. Children screamed at the sight of him, adults cursed his existence, and the elderly shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about how the world had gone mad. His reign of mischief had turned Bombay upside down, leaving the city on edge, its people locking doors and windows that had once been left carelessly ajar. Even the local police, usually preoccupied with human troublemakers, pickpockets, petty thieves, and the occasional rowdy drunk, found themselves swapping stories about this furry outlaw over cups of steaming chai. Yet, for all the havoc he wreaked, no one knew his story. Who was he? Where had he come from? Was he a stray from the outskirts of the city, driven into Bombay by hunger or curiosity? Or had he escaped from some travelling circus, a captive turned rebel? And why, of all places, had he chosen this sprawling, chaotic city as his battleground? The questions lingered, unanswered as his legend grew. One fateful day, hunger gnawed at him more fiercely than usual. His small stomach rumbled, and his keen senses led him to a modest home on the edge of the city. Through an open window, his sharp eyes spotted a prize, a bowl of ripe, glistening fruit sitting unattended on a kitchen table. Mangoes, guavas, and a single pomegranate, its red skin practically glowing in the afternoon light. Unable to resist, he darted inside, his nimble paws reaching for the treasure. He grabbed a mango, sinking his teeth into its juicy flesh, when BAM! The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud. He was trapped. Panic set in like wildfire. He screeched and leaped, clawing at the walls, his nails scraping against the plaster as he searched desperately for an escape. The room seemed to close in around him. Pots clattered to the floor, a chair tipped over in his frenzy. Then, from the shadows of the doorway, a man emerged, his silhouette tall and imposing. In his hands he held a net, its fibres glinting faintly in the dim light. The monkey thrashed and bared his teeth, snapping at the air in defiance, his heart pounding in his tiny chest. But the man was quick and determined, his movements practiced and calm. In moments, the monkey's wild struggle ended. His hands and feet were bound with coarse rope, his body pinned beneath the weight of the net. Outside, a crowd gathered, drawn by the commotion. People who had once bolted their doors in fear now pressed close, peering through the windows and spilling into the street. They pointed and laughed, their voices rising in a chorus of mockery. The terror of Bombay, the scourge of their sleepless nights, was reduced to a helpless captive, squirming in his restraints as the rope bit into his skin. The mighty had fallen, and the city rejoiced in its victory, some clapping their hands while others snapped photos with their phones, eager to share the tale. But amidst the jeers and triumphant shouts, a question lingered in the air, faint but persistent. Was he truly a villain, or just a desperate creature, lost in a concrete jungle that wasn't his own? A few in the crowd, a child with wide eyes, an old woman leaning on her cane, watched silently, their expressions softer as if they sensed something the others didn't. They locked him in a cage, but this was no ordinary punishment. The authorities, it turned out, had something unexpected in store for him, a plan whispered among themselves in hushed tones. For days he sat behind bars, his spirit dampened but not broken. The metal enclosure was cold and cramped, the floor stained with rust, but his captors weren't cruel. People, some in uniforms, others in plain clothes, brought him food, bananas, handfuls of roasted nuts and cool water in a tin bowl. Slowly his strength returned. His matted fur, once dull from months of scavenging, began to shine again under their care. The fire in his eyes, dimmed by exhaustion, flickered back to life, a spark of the wild creature he'd always been. He didn't know it yet, but his captors weren't planning to keep him confined forever. They watched him closely, noting his every move, as if preparing for something bigger. Then, one crisp morning, everything changed. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. The cage door creaked open with a groan, and a flood of golden sunlight spilled inside, warming the metal bars. Hesitant at first, he froze, his ears twitching at the unfamiliar sound of birdsong beyond the walls. He stepped forward, one paw at a time, blinking against the brightness that stung his eyes. When his vision cleared, his breath caught in his throat, and his heart raced with something new: hope. Before him stretched an endless expanse of green, trees swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like a whispered promise. Birds called from the canopy, their songs weaving through the air, while the earthy scent of moss and soil filled his lungs. This wasn't a prison cell or a crowded city street. This was a forest, vast and untamed, stretching out as far as his soul eyes could see. For a moment he stood still, taking it all in, the chirping crickets, the distant trickle of a stream, the soft rustle of a squirrel scampering nearby. It was a world he'd almost forgotten, a world he'd been born to inhabit. He paused at the edge of this new world, turning back for one last look. Bombay loomed in the distance, its towering skyline hazy against the horizon, a jagged silhouette of concrete and steel. The city that had branded him a terrorist, a menace, a thief, was now just a chapter in his past, fading like a dream upon waking. He thought of the kitchens he'd raided, the faces he'd startled, the nights he'd spent dodging brooms and shouts. With a final glance, he let go of the chaos, the fear, the gnawing hunger that had driven him to its streets so long ago. Then, in a flash, he leapt forward, his small body surging with energy. He darted up a tree, his claws digging into the bark as he swung from branch to branch with a grace that belied his months of urban warfare. The leaves rustled around him, brushing against his fur as he climbed higher and higher, the forest canopy swallowing him whole. In seconds, he vanished into the wilderness, his grey form blending into the shadows of the trees, leaving nothing behind but the echo of his departure. The people of Bombay would talk about him for years, some with anger, their voices sharp, as they recounted the messes he'd left behind, others with amusement, chuckling over the absurdity of it all, and a few with quiet sympathy, wondering what had driven him to their doorstep. To them, he'd been a rogue, a troublemaker who'd disrupted their lives, a pest to be eradicated, but perhaps in the end, he was something simpler, something truer, a wild soul, searching for freedom in a city that could never understand him, a creature caught between two worlds until fate set him free. And now, at last, he'd found it, somewhere deep in the embrace of the forest, where the air was clean and the only rules were those of nature itself.